Buenos días. Muchas gracias a todos por
Good
participar.
morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this new Ask Me Anything. This particular Emma will focus on geomaps, geocities, and more. We will follow the exact dynamics that we have been following previously. First, we will go through the introduction of the team leaders. We will briefly introduce the topic afterwards, and then we will open up the floor for questions. If you have any questions and you want to participate, turn on your cameras and your mics so that you can participate actively. Hi, I am Javier. I know most of you. I am part of the GeneXus team, and today we will be focusing on questions about geomaps and geocities, mostly focused on the two presentations that we shared with you, but we can also focus on any other questions. We also have Karen here with me. Hi, good morning, everyone. I also work in the development area for GeneXus, especially in the area of reporting. And as Javier mentioned, we will be answering all of your questions and doubts. We also have Marco, Jose, and several other people of the development team over here. I want to share a very brief presentation about the work that we did this year in this area. So the question is how to include maps and geographical information in GeneXus apps. This year, particularly, one of the things that we did was to focus on native mobile applications. We focused on both Android and iOS generators. We created a new layer called geometry layer. And basically, it allows us to logically group a set of geographical attributes. So the base case that I always comment to describe this is I have a GeneXus transaction with a geoline attribute where I have the streets for a city, and I would like to group them as avenues, streets, roads, or into different categories. So using this particular feature, we have an easier way of doing this. We abstract information a bit more and we allow over the different layers, for example, over the avenue layers, for me to set a particular style or color for the lines. And I can switch on or off that layer of avenues or boulevards or streets or roads. Another aspect that we focused on this year that was quite significant was the aspect of waypoints with direction layer. The direction layer is another layer for mobile apps that we have. And it allows us to, given 2 or more points in a map, to show the way that we have between those points. So far, what we did was basically to optimize this for only 2 points. But if we had more points, which are what we call the waypoints, we didn't have a feature for that. So now we have an added feature where we can create the connection between those intermediate points. And in the case where we are using either Google or Apple, the Google or Apple provider allows us to organize those points so we can turn on a flag so that it can set the shortest road between those intermediate points or waypoints. So there are changes here at the level of the mobile apps, but also at the server level, because we're solving this in the direction request info service, and that service is through a redirection method, returning the waypoints back to us. And another big project that we worked on to this year was to publish GeoCD. It's one of the things that we presented in GeneXus Live. This is a native mobile app that tries to be a starting point for certain developments and a KV that we want to use in a way to unify all of the features that we have, and we can also use it for testing. So you can download this, but I will share with you the links for those apps later on and for the documentation as well. Specifically in Android, we started working with the generation of maps for Huawei. We have a new feature with Android that allows us to generate for Huawei, and we were working with maps for that. And also for Android, we have a new provider. We are trying in a way to broaden the scope of cartography providers. We work with Google, Apple, and Baidu. Now we have Mapbox, which is a leading company in cartography. And together with this new provider, we have a new interesting feature that so far only works for Mapbox, not for Google or Apple, which is to have all of the maps fully offline. Right now, we can create an offline app, but the maps depend on whether or not we have access the cache and the information to be in the cache. But right now we can download the area of a map and see it offline. We also worked on technological updates. The most interesting update I would think would be location precision, because platforms, both Android and iOS, allow us to obtain a rather precise location precision. And of course, that has a direct impact in the resources consumed by the device. So what we are offering now is that at the time permits are being requested for location, because remember that every time we are working with geolocation, permits are being asked. Those permissions are offered on whether or not they are precise. We also have a method that indicates what kind of precision we're using within the app. And that was also a rather dramatic change that affected native mobile and the server as well. And hand in hand with this, and even if this is not something that the end user can see, at the internal level, we did a significant map refactoring, especially for new providers. And this allows us to have a cleaner code. So if eventually someone would like to create a new provider, they will definitely notice the specific changes that we made over there. This does not have a direct impact on the end client, but it's good for you to know. We also updated the Baidu maps. We improved them both for precision in Android and in web servers. Baidu, for those of you who do not know, is a map provider for China. And then at the server level, we also updated the geography functions and we optimized them. These are functions that are executed in the database. So when we're calling for a distance between 2 points, that is solved at the level of the database. So we optimize the DBMSs to verify that all those called to functions are as optimal as possible. And if we can solve them at the level of the database for us to do it. And if not, then we go back to the code. And then I go back to Karen so she can tell us a bit about the query. So in the query viewer, we worked on implementing maps. Within the maps and query viewer control, we have two map types. One is the Choropleth and the other is a bubbles map. The difference between one and the other mostly depends on the nature of our data and on what we want to represent, of course. Each of them have advantages and disadvantages. Also, at the same time, the kinds of data types that we need to represent these maps follow either the ISO code 3166 or 3166-2, depending on whether this is a country or the subdivision of a country. And these data types fall for choropleth or bubble maps. And then we have geopoint data types that only fall for bubble map types. And they allow us to access the geolocalization of a point to which we normally cannot access with an ISO code. And we also offer through the conditional styles property a discrimination of the values represented in the map through colors. We can use different value ranges over there, and this allows us to better analyze the information. And that would be it for what I had to say. Okay, so if we have no more to say, then let's move on to the Q&A. So if any of you has any questions, please turn on your cameras, turn on your mics, and go ahead.
Bueno, mientras se van
While you start thinking about your questions. I'm going to be asking the questions that I got via email. Virginia asks, I have a service that offers mobility data with the route of a bus and bus stops. Can I integrate that with a GeneXus app? Okay, so basically, what I would recommend is for you to download the GeoCity app that we publish in GeneXus Life that has examples of that information. Of course, when you want to integrate geographical information, we need to know what the format is. We have KML, GeoJSON. There are services that provide an XML. So there's always a format for that. We have examples of how to import data depending on the format or to simply visualize that data. Because in the case of native mobile, for example, we have a control method that will allow you to directly visualize a KML. And the other thing that you need to be mindful of is with data itself. That is, what is the reference system that you are using? We mainly use WSG 74, so that's latitude and longitude. If you have local coordinates, where in the GeoCity we had a lot of information from the statistics institutes and from the government of Montevideo, and we had local meter coordinates, and we needed to convert those coordinates to optimally visualize that within the apps. So I believe that you can just download that KV. Yes. Mariana is asking if we can share with her the link of that KV. If you can include that in the chat, I would be thankful. Carolina asks, how can I add a map to GeneXus app? Okay, so basically there are 2 or 3 ways to add maps to the apps. In the case of a native mobile app, it's through a grid that has a time-ups control. In the case of web apps, it's through user control, which is the map control. And as Karen mentioned, if we want to visualize data in a graphic way, if you will, we can do that through the query viewer. So that's basically the 3 ways for you to visualize those maps. Of course, there is a great deal of features without an interface. Jaime asks, is there a plan or way to support heat maps? I'll take that with Karen. Yes, we are assessing the possibility of including the heat map as well. That's part of our backlog. Yes, that's something that we have been consulted about and we are thinking about implementing in the near future. Matias is asking if we will share this webinar on YouTube, and the answer is yes. All the webinars are recorded and they are in our website. You can see that in YouTube or in our website. Rodrigo asks, I want to generate the app that you showed in GeoCity for my city. What should I do? Okay, over there in the chat, I copied the link for the KV. But what we did in this KV is, on the one hand, share examples of how to consume public data. And then we have another part for panels that use that public data. So if you want to generate for a specific place, what you need to do is obtain geographic data with information, for example, in our case, of places from which garbage is picked up, or indicators of where the city council is located. You need to get that open data and then you process that data in the app. And in the KB, that's unified in a single module in a set of procedures and data providers that populate this database. Does the audience have any questions? If not, I continue with the questions that I got via email. Okay, I continue with the email then. Someone asks, what map providers can be used in the GeneXus apps? So in terms of open source providers, for example, our Open Strigma, that is a database, an open database, but providers are almost always bound to someone who is the person that publishes and hosts the maps. And what we're doing right now basically is opening up those providers that historically were Apple, Google, and Baidu. And we now have Mapbox that I mentioned, and at the level of the query viewer, we have two map providers, and we are going along those lines. Okay, perfect. Gerardo is asking, can I generate the GeoCD app for web, and what GeneXus version should I use for that? Okay, so most of the features for that are in native mobile. We still do not have a published version for web, but some features can be used for web. We are also using the Angular generator for this app as well. But there are many features that operate at the server level, as is the case of the delivery. We can solve it there. KML can also be solved there. So we will be working on that for sure, but right now most of the app can be developed with the features that we have. Specifically for web, we are working with a new map provider, and we are trying to complete that control. This is a project that we started a while ago, but we stopped it with that for a bit because we are now focused on native mobile on the query viewer, but the project is still alive, and what we want is to, of course, modernize the web controls and the Angular controls to have more providers. Perfect. I have a question from Lucia. Can I use the geolocalization domain rather than the geography data type? What's the difference between them? Okay, so in terms of geolocation, historically, to add geographical information in the knowledge base was a string attribute that was latitude versus latitude. That's what is known as geolocation. And then we have an external object as well. What we did last year is we started using the native type of the database, which is geography, which is binary, and all the features in the external object are now in a standard object called maps. That's at the level of the server side. And then in the user interface, either for SD or for web, the geographic attributes have the exact same features of geolocation and then some more. So in general lines, if we can use the geography attribute, that is, the DBMS can support the geographic types, that's what we recommend. Right now, we do not have any features that do not include geographic types. There are some DBMSs that don't have them or are in the process of having them, but the geolocation type remains. But if we had to choose, of course, use the geographic data type that optimizes things at the server level and does things that the geolocation will not do. Okay, perfect. Thank you. In the case of a native mobile app offline, can we solve the map offline? Yes. If you have an offline app, which means that the database is offline, you can do it. All the routing will be solved by calling the Google APIs, but the app can be offline, of course. Perfect. Along those lines, someone asks if we can create a delivery app with GeneXus. Well, yes. I mean, again, the GeoCD KB has an example of that, which is what we exemplify for a delivery style app. And it's based on two features that we have, which are the selection layer and the direction layer. So yes, you can definitely see that KB as an example to abstract a bit more. The selection layer allows you to navigate in the map and decide the place that you want to select. And then the direction layer that shows us the web. And then we have another layer, which is direction layer that could show us a fleet of Ubers if we're using Uber, for example. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Diego has specific questions. You can simply open up your mic. You can ask whatever you want, Diego. So go ahead and ask them. Okay, well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm not turning on my camera because I'm having network issues, but I work with Grido. That's an ice cream company, and I would like to know if it's possible to generate an app or if you have that app itself. And I'm sorry because I'm not aware of not, but I want to know if we can generate a mapping of sort for business areas to also include information about number of inhabitants in a region, about number of clients that go through that area. I don't know if the question is up for this forum or if I should ask this more specifically. Okay, so if we're talking about the number of inhabitants in an area, what you need to get first is information about that number of inhabitants, and then you can create those areas in a native mobile app where you can show that also at the level of the query viewer. Then we should, I think, go into detail about your specific requirements for the app. But what I do think that you should obtain are the geographic data for those queries. And then you can do operations within GeneXus. You can create intersections for two geometries. So you can include the number of, for example, inhabitants, and then also include other information. But over there, you also need to include the app requirements. I don't know if anyone else understood something different out of the question or wants to add something, but I think it boils down to this. Diego, do you want to ask your question again or? Well, let's see. What we do is we are working on an expansion process for our sales points that at the same time depend on consumption, the amount of inhabitants in an area. And we also want to know, as consumption increases, if we can perhaps create certain niches or find certain niches that we had not explored at the beginning or initially, but that is more technical or more specific, because even if nowadays we do have that information based on the number of squares or about the number of passing clients, we would like all that information to be condensed into one database so that this can be a bit more simple for us and can actually help us to open new stores or things like that. I don't know if I'm being clear. Okay, so I always say that there are many features that we have that in a way go hand in hand with the geographical information systems that have many features of their own. As you're saying, okay, so you have information about my company's stores. Well, that's something that is easy to geo-locate. You can get all of the positions, and then you can see that in a GeneXus app. And then you can intersect all of that with what we call districts or neighborhoods that have the most inhabitants. And then I can create intersections for my stores, and I can see if there is a district that has many inhabitants, so I can get information about where I could open a new store. You can do that, of course, but if you want to do something a bit more complex, such as combining 3 geographical areas and then as of there onwards, do another operation, well, there are things that perhaps you might not be able to do, but there are geographic systems, the geographic information systems, or GISs, that have a wide array of options and features that you can implement. But yes, many of those things, at least at the basic level, are implemented in GeneXus, and we solve them at the level of the database. The relational database offers features for geography, and that's what we exploit. There are other functions, though, that we do not have, such as ArcGIS or UHIS, and many other tools that are specific only for geography, and we don't have that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have a question here from Mariano. Mariano says, are you thinking about adding the possibility of using OpenStreetmap? Well, that's what I was saying. OpenStreetMap is basically a public database, and we have map providers that use that public database. For example, at the web level, what we are developing is a control based on an app called Leaflet, and Leaflet offers different possible map providers, among which some use OpenStreetMap. It also opens maps that are VR, but OpenStreetMap does not have an API service that you can use in a JavaScript or native mobile app. There is an ecosystem of companies around OpenStreetMap that do that, and we are selecting some of them. For example, this new provider, Mapbox, that we are implementing, has its own map service that is set up based on NASA maps and other data that they have. So this is another map provider that is, between inverted commas, open source, but they offer a service, but you have to have an API and subscribe to them. That is more or less the way to go if we want to add and create new providers. But of course, costs vary depending on the provider. I mean, if you want to use one provider or another one, sometimes it's because you have been working with one provider and you have developed things for that provider, and sometimes it's because of the costs associated to using that particular provider. So we're trying to open the possibilities, so we're using different providers such as Google or Apple or other ones. The question is more focused on not being tied to a license. Well, I mean, I think that nowadays, or in as much as I know, all these providers require a license. Some are cheaper, some are more affordable, but you need a map host that will show you in some way that geographic data that OpenStreetMap does not show you, because OpenStreetMap is a database, so they will not offer the maps in that same way. But we are working along the lines of trying to find the offers in the market, try to cover as much as possible, and eventually to try to come up with specific providers that perhaps have systems that work with JavaScript or with native mobile. So we are open to hearing what our clients need, basically. Okay, so I have a question from Beatriz now. What formats can I use in order to deploy a map in the query viewer? Okay, I'll answer that. You can use GeoPoint data, but in that case, that's only for bubbles maps. Or you can use the 3166 or 3166-2 ISO code data types, and that's for Choropleth or Bubbles maps. You can use either to deploy the maps in the query viewer. Perfect. I have a question from Inés. When downloading maps, how do I know when that download has been completed? Can I see the downloaded percentage and the file size before the download? Okay, so for map downloads, we are working towards creating that system. There is a download event that is triggered. We do not have a way of showing you as of now the percentage of download, and the AMPI does not offer today information to know what the size of that map will be. But what is clear is that when you download a map, you set up an area and you can set up the zoom. So the bigger the area, the heavier the file. And there is a file size limit though. I cannot remember what that size was, but when the size goes above that, the download is initiated, and then you get a prompt saying that the size is too big. So that's how the download works in Mapbox. Mapbox is the only provider that gives us that option. Juan Perez says, hi, in the KB of the study case, is it possible to add a project database to check data that comes by default in the presentation of Javier? Thank you.
A ver, no sé si entendí.
I don't know if I understand the question. Do you want to get the project database? Yes. Okay, so we populate the database, as I mentioned, through a module. We have a module through which data is loaded. You can do that using any DBMS that has geographic data. And through that, you can have a local SQL or Oracle or whatever you want, the data that we have loaded there. And that's data that is published in other services. I mean, we are not thinking about distributing the database, but what we are working on though is for you to be able to access to one thing. We will not be sharing this app in the store, but we will have an internal deploy to visualize that. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, it does. I have a question from Gabriel now. If I want to deploy a map in the query viewer, will the geographic data have to have a specific format? Yes. As previously mentioned, it needs to be, for example, from the ISO code with the ISO code structure. If it's from a country 3166, and if it's a subdivision 3166-2, or if not, it can be geopoints. Okay, perfect. I have a question from Enrique. Apparently, the subdivision level for each country is the highest level. What happens if I need an even highest level of subdivision? Can I use Query Viewer for that? Okay, right now we do not provide the representation of a map for a district or a neighborhood. What we can do though is within the bubbles maps, use geopoint data to access the representation of data in more specific spots. If not, outside of Query Viewer, perhaps Javier can tell you how to represent that. I don't know if I really understood the question, but yes, I think you can. As I was saying, you need to have a reference system for that. In mobile apps, we have a single reference system, but yes, you can represent that. Okay, perfect. I do not have any more questions left. Does anyone have any questions over there? Someone that has any doubts or questions? Know that this is a great opportunity. We have the support team and the development team here, and you can ask them any questions or doubts that you might have. Hi, good afternoon. I am Alejandro Michan. Hi, Alejandro, go ahead. So I'm running tests on a KB where I would like to get geographic coordinates of a specific point in a map, and I am using the user control maps to refer to that. And I am also using programming to directly obtain coordinates from Google. But as I've seen in many examples and also through the source code, I have a geographic point through the real address, that is Montevideo and a specific spot. And from there, I get the geographic address. I'm trying to implement that, but I cannot do it using that formula. So I don't know if there's perhaps an update that I need to do or if something changed in GeneXus for me to implement that code. Oh, okay. What happens with that feature is that that feature is solved by the providers. They offer services. For example, the most common case is the Google case. So at the level of your knowledge base, what you need to have, if you're using Google, for example, is to have key. And what Google has done specifically is it has divided the AP key based on what they can be used. So sometimes if you want to provide an address and get a coordinate for it, you need to enable for your API key a geocoding. There is another API key for map visualization, another for direction. So it has many features and you learn what you want to use with that API key. In the Google case, you need to include a credit card. So you have to provide billing information. So most probably what is happening to you, but we can see that at the log level, of course, because if we open the log, we can see that call to the service, because what the platforms solve is that they solve a service that we are calling to. So you can use the pick location method for the external object map, or no, I'm sorry, with the geocode method, with the geocode address method. In the geolocation object, I forgot the name, but with either case, you call to a low-level service. And if you turn on the log, if the service tells you that you are missing the API key information, then you will see it there and you will need to include it. But if you want, you can share with me the code that you are using, and so I can check whether or not the code is working properly, but it's just calling the external object or of the maps or geolocation functions. But you need to have an enabled API key to get that response. So most probably the issue is with the API key. Yes, I did got the Google API keys and I did enable them for web service. I'm guessing it's this billing part that I have not included any credit card, and I have no associated credit cards, and that's probably why this is happening. I was able to solve that with the geolocation domain to send some coordinates with latitude and longitude, but I got that a sequence of events, and then I was directed to the point within the map. However, I am still missing something, which is that I not only want to go to a part of the map, but I also want to get a specific point, like when you select one point in the Google map, like a view, something to specify this is the point that you are referring to. I don't know if I'm clear with it. Oh, so you mean the user taps in the website or in the device, and then for them to get the position, or are you entering, I don't know, national stadium, and you want to get a coordinate? What are you doing? Will the user include that, or will the user write it? I want the user to write down that. I mean, I'm working on that first, on having the user write down that information in a view panel, and from then onwards for them to get a geolocation variable and then to be sent to the point in the map for me to see the grid, the exact point. So that's two steps. If what you want is for the person to write that down and for that to then become a map that shows you a point for that place that you included within the code, then you should have a text in the screen, and that text from an event needs to call the external objects map dot geocode address and send that text, and that should send back a coordinate, which is what I mentioned, that appears in the log whether or not the service is returning back to you a coordinate. And then when you get that coordinate, depending on whether it's web or SSD, making the map stand there is just adding that point. In the web case is in a structure in an SDT, and in the SD, because you have a grid, it's the same. You could have a grid for an SDT, or you can add that point in a transaction with a geopoint attribute, because I think a geopoint attribute would suffice, and you can create control time maps for that grid indicating what the attribute is. Please just share your email with me so that I can share with you some examples of that in geography data type. It's basically two calls, one to the external object that returns the coordinate back to you, and then another one within the interface so that the map can position itself there. But yeah, you can do that for sure. As a matter of fact, the app that we published has that feature.
No, por favor.
Thank you, Gabriel. Any more questions or doubts or comments?
Chicos del equipo, algo que quieran comentar que no les hayan
For
preguntado.
the team members, is there anything else that you would like to comment? No, just one thing along the lines of what we have been working on are many of these native mobile features. We want to have them in the Angular generator. Some in a way we want to update the user control and the map control. We are also modernizing the query viewer. I mean, those are the lines along which we are working on the development. And the goal that we have ahead of ourselves is to expand on the amount of providers that we have, which is why we are working with Mapbox right now. I think that that's the road ahead for us. Okay, thank you. Someone asks if the GeoCD project will continue to be updated based on all of these features. Yes, as a matter of fact, we are working with the 2.0 version of this project, where we want to also include 2 more examples, especially for the POTUS, which would be the delivery example. We want to include over there the animation portion as well, and we will also include an example for tracking. so that you can add geographic information. As we know, to add that, you can geocode, looking for a text, or you can tap the map, or you can turn on a tracking system. So where you are moving, you will see the places where your cab or your Uber is going through. So that tracking example will also be included in that knowledge base so that you can see all the main features represented there. And so it's easier for you to initiate any development or testing. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I don't know if there are any more questions left. Someone is asking, for a developer who is getting started using Geo Reports, what is the road ahead to recommend that person? Karen? If this developer is just getting started with Geo Reports, we recommend for you to check the session that we recorded, and also a KB that includes all the examples of the maps that we mentioned. We also have documentation where you can see how to start representing information in maps. It's a step-by-step guide. And I think that those are the lines. Yeah, and we had an AMA for that. Yes, we did. We had an AMA for that. Yeah. So all of that is in our website. As a matter of fact, we did share with you over there. That's www.genexus.com/webinars. Over there, you can find all of the webinars available to you. If we have no more questions, what I would like to mention is that if at any point any questions come up, I recommend you go to our Stack Overflow. We have been sharing all of our forums over there. We are interacting over there with the community. And apart from that, I do want to tell you that we will continue working with these AMAs all the way up to December 16th. We're having all these AMAs on Tuesdays and Thursdays for any topic that you want to delve into. So check the grid in www.genexus.com/live, where you will see all the webinars to come. So that's it for us today. We'll see you later. Thank you to the team. Thank you to all of you for participating, and I'll see you in the next AMA. Thank you. Bye.